after the Metoo movement brought to light a wave of allegations of sexual misconduct in Hollywood and on Capitol Hill, some are calling for a similar national reckoning in a surprising field: medicine. Sexual misconduct by doctors is a rare occurrence, but when it happens, it casts a dark shadow over a profession built on trust. For the past several months, Spotlight on America has been digging into doctor discipline files state by state, and we uncovered dozens of incidents of impropriety. We were surprised to discover that discipline in many of these cases wasn't as automatic as you might expect. In this report, we introduce you to victims who say their doctor preyed on female patients for years. And we peel back the curtain on a system designed to hold physicians accountable when they cross the line. We want to warn you, some of the content in this story is graphic. There are secrets every woman keeps, but at some point, even the darkest of them can bubble to the surface. That's what happened to Lisa Pratt and her best friend Katie Medley in the summer of 2020, when something both had buried deep was revealed with a single question.
I'm like, did you ever have any weird experiences with Dr. Farley? Her face basically went white, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, hey, I'm not the only one.
When she hits you with that question,
I felt like I was gonna pass out. I felt just hot and flushed.
Lisa and Katie had trusted the same Oregon physician for years. He delivered their children and provided their routine care. During multiple visits, they both claim, though, he was sexually inappropriate with them. And they're not alone.
For chronic neuropathic pain,
Pratt and Medley are among more than 100 women suing this man, Dr. David Farley, for sexual misconduct they allege took place in this small family practice outside Portland. Court documents detail graphic allegations that Farley forced some patients to strip naked. Others, including minors, were allegedly subjected to unnecessary pelvic and breast exams, ungloved rectal exams, while others allege he photographed their genitals on his cell phone. What did you notice that sort of changed your mindset of this guy might not be exactly what I think?
When I look back, there were a lot of little red flags. I was in for my baby's 2-week appointment, and he asked me how breastfeeding was going, and I said, great, everything's going wonderfully. And then he proceeded to walk over and stick his face directly on my breast.
The worst experience of assault that I had with Dr. Farley was a pelvic exam during which he just sexually assaulted me with his ungloved hand, and it wasn't a pelvic exam at all.
Medley and Pratt took their complaints to the Oregon State Medical Board, the agency in charge of disciplining doctors. It initially allowed Farley, whose attorneys did not respond to our repeated attempts for comment, to voluntarily withdraw from practicing medicine without admitting any wrongdoing, pending an investigation. Weeks later, his license was revoked by the board.
If it weren't for us coming forward, his license would not have been revoked. He would have been able to quietly step away.
So you're just sort of collateral damage until they put something out?
Yes. Yeah.
How's that feel?
Awful. It hurts.
It's absolutely devastating.
And it's not unique to Oregon. A Spotlight on America investigation dug through doctor discipline records nationwide going back a few years. We found dozens of incidents of sexual misconduct by physicians from coast to coast, as well as evidence that some state medical boards failed to take quick or strong action to hold doctors accountable.
It is outrageous that the medical boards aren't doing a better job.
Dr. Sidney Wolf is the founder of the health research group at Public Citizen, a consumer advocacy group in Washington, D.C. He's been raising the alarm about sexual misconduct in medicine for years. Well, you'd think that this is a scenario where physicians would want to root out any bad apples so that they don't taint the whole profession, but that doesn't seem to happen. Why do you think that is?
Well, that's because there are too many people on the board who really don't think it's appropriate to go against their fellow doctors. The forces are really stacked up against solving this national crisis of inadequate discipline of doctors.
Our months-long investigation found a lack of transparency in some states. That means the public is not being warned about doctors who've engaged in sexual misconduct. Delays in taking action in some cases that could put patients at risk. And what some experts consider weak standards of punishment that often allow doctors to walk away or gives them a slap on the wrist, opening the door for them to potentially continue abusing patients. We uncovered at least 3 cases where doctors were allowed to quietly give up their medical licenses after repeated misconduct, including sexually violating male patients, conducting ungloved vaginal exams, even trying to have sex with a sedated patient at a hotel just hours after surgery. Spotlight on America also found several cases where the punishment for misconduct was probation or restrictions that merely barred doctors from seeing female patients but allowed them to keep practicing. In many of the cases that we looked at where doctors are disciplined, they're often given conditional discipline, things like they can't see female patients, they have to have a chaperone. Do those sorts of concessions actually work and curb this kind of behavior?
The evidence is quite clear that probation is a slap on the wrist. It's not effective. Zero tolerance is what there should be for sexual offenders in this country. It's a complete betrayal of the doctor-patient relationship.
In 2020, Dr. Wolf wrote a letter on behalf of Public Citizen to several medical organizations, calling for misconduct to be labeled as abuse and demanding a zero-tolerance policy for physicians engaged in that behavior. It's a more aggressive approach, he says, that has already been successful in parts of Canada and New Zealand. In your opinion, if a doctor is engaged in sexual misconduct, there should be no questions, revocation, no more practice for that physician?
I think that it is entirely appropriate and necessary for states in the United States to pass laws that say if we find that a doctor has been guilty of sexually abusing a patient, they lose their license for life unless it's something that does not involve sexual contact with the patient. If it happens, which hopefully is sooner rather than later, it will happen at the level of the state.
That's because doctors are regulated by state, not federal law, and they're governed by boards that many believe are often biased in favor of physicians. Spotlight on America discovered nationwide most medical boards include only a few members from outside the medical profession, if any at all. In Alabama and South Carolina, their medical boards don't include a single member of the public right now. Florida, Kansas, and Iowa have just 3 public members each, compared with 12, and 6 doctors, respectively. Only California and Delaware have a near equal balance.
Truly been doing everything they can.
Few know the arcane system of disciplining physicians better than Dr. Humayun Chowdhury. He's the president and CEO of the Federation of State Medical Boards. Why don't we see? We sat down with him to try to understand why the public isn't given a stronger voice on the boards that hold doctors accountable. Why not equal up the number of members on this just to make it appear as though the process involves outside thinking?
Well, I think it's important to know that at one time, not too long ago, Josie, state boards had only physicians. There were no public members, 0. So we strongly support public engagement. And even if the numbers are small, I think it's also important to keep in mind that many times public members will become chairs of their boards.
But if they can be voted down and pushed aside because there's only 2 of them and there are 15 other members, they can voice their opinion, but at the end of the day, they're not the decision maker.
You're right, and there is a democratic process. It's a group process, and so the majority rules. But at the same time, because of the public member's unique role, when the public speaks through that representation, I've seen more often than not that voice being listened to.
Chowdhury claims his organization has long been a loud voice in the effort to curb sexual misconduct among physicians.
I think there are opportunities galore to tighten the process so that we have less of this and maybe even eliminate it. But I think everyone would agree that this is absolutely unacceptable and has to stop.
In 2020, the Federation released 38 recommendations for state boards, ranging from increased transparency to intensive education about what constitutes sexual misconduct. But none of those recommendations are binding. And almost 2 years later, our own survey of state boards found a mixed bag in terms of concrete action. One board even admitted to us they haven't adopted a single recommendation. There are critics who would say your organization answers to its membership and then doesn't really have any teeth. How do you respond to that when you come up with thoughtful recommendations that should bring about change, but the states may not use them?
Well, that's an excellent point, and we do what we can to make them aware of our recommendations so that they don't just lie on a shelf somewhere, and we can nudge them. And we've had some very good conversations with state boards saying, well, we've done this. Do you think that's adequate? What are some neighboring states doing? And they don't have to adopt all of our recommendations. I think some of the more challenging ones are to encourage a change in the culture. I mean, that's a recommendation you can't just do overnight.
But patient advocates think action should be more significant than mere recommendations, especially in the wake of high-profile cases of long-standing abuse, including USA Gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar and former USC gynecologist George Tyndall, both of which took years to bring to light. Do you think the medical community needs a Metoo reckoning of its own?
100%. To hold a doctor accountable seems to be 10 times harder. Absolutely, there should be a Metoo movement within the medical profession, and I hope to help start that.
How many of these cases do you think we have to see nationwide before somebody steps up to the plate at the federal level and says this system does not work?
I think that's the $1 million question. How many of these children and women do we have to parade across the media as collateral damage, the ones that are bearing the cost of there not being a way to prevent this from happening? I'm terrified to live in a society that doctors are beholden to no one. We need their help to provide accountability so that the good doctors can keep helping people and the malicious doctors can be stopped.